Hello and welcome back, adventurers. Today we are going to rank the runes available to the Runesmith. Well, we're going to kick off that process anyway. This is a build your own kind of class, like the commander, right? So we're ranking the the individual runes that you could add to your repertoire, and it matters here a lot because there's a quite a few runes, and your repertoire is not nearly that large. So you're going to have to really carefully pick and choose. But before we jump in, first of all, what does every rune have? Well, there's a couple different kinds of runes. We have the general runes, and then we have diacritic runes. Today we're talking about general runes, not diacritic runes. So the runes have a usage. This is what you can put them on: a creature, armor, an object, a willing creature, whatever have you. The next is their passive effect while the rune is either etched or traced onto them. And the final is the invocation. So what happens when you trigger it before it disappears? So like I said, that covers most runes, but not the diacritic runes. What really matters for today, though, isn't diacritic runes at all, because today I'm going to stick only with the level 1 runes that exist because there are so many of them already. There are 14 level 1 runes. Next video, I'll rank the level 9 runes and the level 17 runes, because those are both the same style as these, they're just higher level. And then we've got all the diacritic runes, which happen at levels 5 and 13. And that'll be a third video. Now, they won't necessarily be in a row. I might put other things in between. But it's going to take 3 videos to cover everything because there's just so many. And I don't want these to be 2 hours long. And I tend to ramble on a bit. So today, we're talking level 1 runes. But before I can actually talk about ranking them at all, I have to give you my criteria for runes. And this is very different than what I see for subclasses because, again, these are pieces of what you're putting together, not its entirety. So, what does that look like? Well, as you can see on screen here, S is a rune that feels strong when it becomes available and remains strong for the character's lifespan. It should be worth etching, if it's possible to etch it, that is, as well as tracing just for the passive alone. The invoke should be good enough that you want to invoke it whenever you get the chance. It should also have an effect that is very impactful on the invoke, right? It has to have high impact. It should be so good that not having it would feel like a mistake. A is a rune that, again, you will likely keep throughout, but it could fall off at very high levels for these level ones. It should still have a strong passive value or a really strong invoke, but they don't have to both be exceptional. One of them needs to be very strong, though. The other one could just be fine. They both need to at least feel good, right? So we just can't have anything that feels terrible. And if you have downtime, you should want to etch this if it's an etchable one pretty much every time it comes up. B is one that, okay, maybe it doesn't always keep up, but does okay, but you might find something that kind of replaces it in its use for you. It needs to have a strong passive or invoke, but the other one could just be, not good at all, or at least probably not worthless, but not amazing. It should be a decent contender for the type of use, but doesn't have to be the obvious choice in all situations. And there needs to be situations where it could be the best choice, though. C is a rune that is likely short lived in how much you use it amongst your repertoire, but it fills a specific niche that others won't do. Perhaps neither the passive nor the invoke are particularly strong, but they serve a purpose and, they fill a gap, even if you wouldn't etch them or trace them in every situation, every downtime or combat. D is something you really should avoid. Either it would basically never come up in any situation, or if you could apply it, there's always something else you should apply instead. Or etching it or tracing it would just be wasteful and potentially even a trap. So just avoid this. That's what I'm saying. If it's a D, just avoid this. Now that we are set up, let's see how they shake out. And again, apologies. I'm going to try to pronounce these the best I can reading them. It's going to be rough. It's probably different from what I did last time. Anyway, start off with Atryl, Rune of Fire. Again, these are all level 1. The usage here is it's drawn on a creature or an object. The passive here is that whatever it's on has the fire resistance reduced by 5, and this reduction in resistance increases by another one every 2 character levels. So at level 3, this will be reduced by 6. This doesn't affect immunities, though, just resistances. Then we have the Invoke. When you invoke it, you deal 1d8 fire damage with a basic fortitude save, but the creature does become dazzled for 1 round on a crit fail, and level +2 adds another d8 of fire damage. That resistance, the fire resistance from the passive, does work on the Invoke, by the way. That is important. It's clearly meant to be cast on an enemy, right? It means you're not etching it ever. It's just a tracing here. Don't worry, I do not hold that against it. That is its purpose. That is not something I consider a problem at all. The fact that it can be a creature or object is interesting, as you might want to put it on objects, that there might be an object that's hard to destroy that you need to do fire damage to destroy it, or, might be an easy way to deal damage when other things couldn't. So that's interesting. And there's also potential with things like the fire rune. We'll run into others where you could have on an object, and you know there's a slight effect to it, slight amount of light coming off it, things like that. You can read it in the rune itself, but the passive, generally speaking, I don't love. Yes, there are definitely plenty of creatures that have fire resistance. And certainly comes in at all levels. But the resistance is usually a lower level thing. At higher levels, you end up with a lot of immunity. Not a ton, but a lot more. And if this is your only damage rune, then maybe you'd care that you're reducing its fire resistance. Or if your whole team built around fire, but that would just be a bad plan from your team. So if you've got any other damage you could do, and it's resistant to fire, why not just use different damage? The damage on the Invoke is not good. And sadly, we're going to see that come up a lot. 1d8 is just not good. And there's some that have worse. So it's just kind of poor damage along with a weak passive. Now, what I will say is it used to be higher. For anybody who's got the playtest, you know that these used to be 2d6 at a base, and they would go up by 2d6 every 2 character levels. And those hit hard. They felt good. You felt like it was worth using them. This 1d8 was such a massive debuff that it's hard to recommend them anymore, largely. We won't see that all the time, but certainly we see that here. If it was still the 2d6, I would give this a lot better rating. Now, again, we have some things here. Yes, it's possible that you've got a team who built around the fire damage that they want to do, and then this is helpful to them. But again, even that passive, because it's not etched, it's only traced, it's only going to last 1 round, and then you're going to invoke this. It's not like there's no use for it. I just think there are better options. This is a weak one to start with, and it used to be a B for me. But thanks to the debuff in the invoke, it is a C, which is kind of sad. When I look at it, if you're going to take away the 2d6, which again, 2d6 on average is 7 damage on a fail on the save, 1d8 is 4.5. Even 2d4 would be better. At least we'd be at 5. Couldn't this have at least been a d10 and go up by a d10 every 2 levels? I don't feel like that would be broken at all. But then again, 2d6 wasn't either, so whatever. Next up, we have Baruiel, Rune of Hold's Bravery. You cast this on a willing creature. The passive is as long as the willing creature is within 10 feet of an ally, the bearer reduces their frightened level by 2 whenever it would go down by 1. So, you know, it goes down at the end of your turn by 1, but there's other things that can decrease frightened by 1, and it would always go down by 2 for them. So the chance of this character staying frightened for very long is very, very slim. Then the invocation. Each ally of the rune bearer within 10 feet emanation of the rune bearer has their frightened condition reduced by 2. This is absolutely the type of thing you want to etch, right? This is obviously it's a willing ally, or willing creature, I should say, so it's an ally. Definitely etch it. Frighten is common, right? You may not know it's coming, so there's a chance that etching it may not come up. But boy, is frighten common. As conditions go from enemies, it's actually one of the most common. So it's pretty reasonable, that and like being grabbed, right? But it's pretty much on that level. You don't need the invocation to feel good. The passive alone feels good. This creature is going to reduce their frightened faster than everybody else. Fantastic. They're not going to stay frightened. I love that. The invocation is also good. Now, 10-foot emanation is short, sure. So you want to make sure that you've got some allies near them. Of course, since you're the one triggering it as if you're not the bearer, but you're also frightened as the runesmith, you can always get up within 10 feet of them, then trigger this, and then boom, at least both of you got your frightened reduced. But yeah, I think it's very, very strong when it goes off. And I think it'll go off plenty. I think this is often enough that this is worth using. Both the passive and invocation feel good. It's not broken in any way. It's not overpowered. It's strong. This is an A for me. Next, we have Camonica. I don't know what I said last time. I don't feel like it was that. Whatever. Rune of Perplexity. This is used on a creature. The passive here is the first time each turn, the bearer uses a concentrate action, meaning an action with a concentrate trait. It takes 2 mental damage, just takes it. And level +2, this increases by another 1. So just a straight small increase, but it does go up. The invocation here is that the bearer takes 1d4 mental damage with a basic will save, and on a fail is also stupefied 1 for 1 round or 2 on a crit fail. And the damage here goes up by d4 every 2 levels as well. So yeah, obviously this is meant to be traced. The passive is interesting, it does potentially deal damage, but keep in mind it's only 1 round, right? Because you have to trigger this or it's just going to go away. So you could have it on them, right, for 2 rounds, but anyway, it's going to just go away. So you could, do 4 damage with this, assuming they're going to take 2 concentrates and not trigger it with an invoke, but it's just 2 damage each round. At level 1, 2 damage each round isn't bad, but it doesn't scale well enough to keep up with, right? So anyway, you need to also carefully place this, right? This isn't like fire where you can pretty much throw it on anything and you'd be okay. Some exceptions, but pretty much. Not that many creatures are going to have concentrate actions. They're going to be on spellcasters for sure, and some other creatures. So if you're not choosing the right target, or if you don't have targets like that, the passive will never happen, right? That's not necessarily the end of the world. Maybe you're doing this just for the invoke. Now, the invoke doesn't hit very hard, right? The damage is terrible. It's a d4. But you get to stupefy them on a fail, just a fail. And stupefied 1 on a fail for a round might be good enough. If you're trying to set up your friends, okay, I didn't use this against the caster to hurt them with the passive. I threw it against a brute because they're going to fail the will save, and I'm going to set up my ally to do some horrible control to him. That doesn't feel bad. And so, because it can go either way. Thing is, neither one's crazy, and they work in different situations from each other. I think the passive is pretty weak and very situational. I like the invoke a lot more. So the invoke feels good, but not crazy good. And the passive is pretty weak and unlikely to work in many cases. I think this is a nice B. I think it's a solid B, and I even think it's close to an A because of the invoke. Again, if it had been 2d4 damage, going up by 2d4 every 2 levels, I'd be like, yeah, this feels good. You could use this in a lot of cases. And it would feel like you did good damage on top of. But if you're not getting the stupefy out of this, this just isn't good. And that's why I'm going to give it a B. All right, then we have Esvadir, Rune of Whetstones. The usage here is it's drawn on a piercing or slashing weapon or unarmed strike. Keep in mind that, as far as I can tell, you could throw it on something like, a bow that fires piercing ammunition. It would still work there too. That's my take on this. The passive is that on a successful strike, you deal an additional 2 bleed damage per weapon damage die, which doesn't increase, but it increases naturally as you get more weapons damage die. And the invoke, you deal 1d8 slashing damage to an adjacent creature to the bearer with a basic fortitude save, and it goes up by another d8 every 2 levels. So here we have a rune that's absolutely meant for you and an ally. Obviously, this can be etched in downtime, and yeah, I think it's a good candidate for doing so. I think there's some that you'll get value on over time. The fact that it can't be on bludgeoning weapons, that's not a huge deal at all to me. Right, it's the other two. So cool. Bleed damage as a passive is pretty decent as you go throughout combat. It doesn't stack, right? But every creature you're going to be able to put some bleed damage on, and that's going to probably feel pretty good. I mean, at level 4, you're already doing 4 bleed damage. That's some pretty decent damage, actually. So I think as far as the passive goes, this has a pretty strong passive that you might just want to leave the passive on. Now, it is resisted, right? There are immune creatures, there are resisted creatures, but everything is to an extent, and I think it'll come up often enough. If you're an undead campaign, maybe don't take this. Otherwise, yeah, I think you're pretty good. So yeah, pretty solid on average. Then we've got the invoke. Now the invoke says you probably want this on a melee ally because it's got to be an adjacent creature that you hit with this. So maybe not great for somebody just firing arrows. Having said that, you just wouldn't invoke that. You just let them do extra damage with their bow, and there's nothing wrong with that. So as far as the invoke itself, again, it's like the fire. It's just not that much damage. It's just there's nothing extra. There's nothing on a crit fail. It's just damage, so it's mid. But the passive here is pretty solid. I really think this is a pretty decent passive that you could just leave on yourself and an ally and be pretty happy with. So with that, I'm going to give it a solid B as well. I just wish, yeah, I don't know. It's pulls parts together. It's just not crazy, but it's solid, and you won't be upset to have it in your list. That brings us to Holtrik, Rune of Dwarven Ramparts. This is drawn on a shield, and the passive is when the shield is raised, the bearer then increases the circumstance bonus from their raise by 1. So instead of a +2 to AC, it's a +3 to AC when they're raising up that steel shield. The invoke. You raise the shield for the bearer. It keeps the +1 circumstance bonus until the start of the creature's next turn. This is our first support rune. It's a nice defensive support rune here. Another obvious etching candidate, and is probably best used in that way. It may not look like much, but that constant +1 to AC from the raised shield, honestly, that's going to feel good on anybody who's constantly using their shield, right? I mean, in my combat example, I use this with a guardian. Yeah, it's going to be real good there. Got a champion, it's going to feel really good there. So I think that there's a lot of value in just that +1 AC as long as they're raising shield often enough. And this is really best used on an ally because you can invoke for them and raise the shield when they didn't have the ability to do so. Especially if you go right after them in combat, then great. In fact, I'd probably set that up, or I might even wait for them. Say this way, when I want to invoke, boom, I raise your shield for you when you didn't have the actions for it, and now you get this boost, and you didn't have to waste anything on it. But anyway, I wouldn't put it on myself because you can just raise your shield. So why would you invoke it ever? I don't know. It's still good on you as a passive. I'm just saying not as an invoke. This is, in my mind, fantastic. As long as anybody in the team has a shield, this is worth having on. This is something I would etch at the beginning of the day, knowing it's going to have value, leave it on there, and invoke it if I needed to at any point. But because it's that consistent, this gets an A from me. I know it's not flashy and exciting. It's just solid, and I can't see a situation where I wouldn't want it etched for at least one party member every day. Again, I'd only take it if somebody was going to use a shield. So that A is assuming somebody's got a shield in the party. Otherwise, don't take it if nobody's going to use the shield. Then we have Ledria, Rune of Appeal. This is cast onto a creature or etched onto a creature. The passive is the creature has a +1 status bonus to deception, diplomacy, and performance checks. And that's in all situations. The invocation is each creature in 30 feet of the bearer can step closer to the bearer as a free action. Now, that passive bonus to the deception, diplomacy, and performance checks goes up to a +2 at 9th level and +3 at 17th level. This can be solid for any ally that's really leaning into those charisma skills. I wish intimidation was in the list for demoralize. Maybe they felt like that'd be too strong. I disagree. I think it would have been completely fine, and I think that would have upped the value of this considerably. As it stands, there are plenty of combat applications. Obviously, you use deception and diplomacy in combat if you're building for them anyway. Performance, less so. The perform action's pretty terrible, but the other two, solid. And then we have outside, and then we have all the stuff outside of combat. This is a really great one to etch for outside of combat, right? Just put it on your face of the party and great face boost always, just constantly throughout the day. So that feels pretty good. The invocation, I like a lot less. Okay, so all creatures, not all allies, all creatures 30 feet get to step closer to the bearer as a free action. They can or they could not. So you might think, okay, I'll invoke this when it'll just help allies. But that's going to be hard to pull off. To have only allies in a situation where they want to step closer, probably to get away from an enemy, but the enemies aren't in that 30 feet. I don't think that'll be as common as it sounds. And while it certainly would be fine to use in that case, I just, and I love stepping. Free steps are great. I just think this one's harder to use. And if you have enemies and allies within, the enemies can just follow the allies. So I don't know. It's not bad. It's just not great. But I do like the passive. I don't. It's obviously not a combat passive, but boy, is it a really good social passive. So I would consider it just for that. And I don't think that makes it A, but I think it's a solid B. And I do like it for the social aspect. And again, it has some combat application. If there's intimidation in there as well, or instead of performance, this would be an A for me. But it lost that, so it's going to get a B. Next up is Lyskel, Rune of Frost. Cast on again a creature or object like fire. The passive, the bearer has a -5 foot status penalty to speeds, all speeds. If it takes a move action, that is, any action with the move trait, it becomes clumsy 1 until the start of its next turn. The invocation, the bearer takes 1d4 cold damage with a basic fortitude save, and all squares under and adjacent to the creature become difficult terrain for 1 round. Level +2, the damage goes up by a d4. And we're up to our third damage rune. This time, though, with a passive I actually like. A -5 foot status penalty to speeds. Yeah, that's nice. It can affect action economy, plan it out well. It's not always going to because it's just 5 feet. It can. But what I really love is clumsy 1 on a move. You know when a creature has to move. You know that there's melee attacking creatures out there. You throw it on one of them, they're going to have to move. What are they going to do? Just stand there? Whoa, that'd be a huge win. If this rune made somebody just waste a turn, that would be mind blowing. I can't imagine a GM doing that. So instead, they're just going to become clumsy 1. There's no save. They're just clumsy 1. That is strong. A non save clumsy 1, even if it's just for 1 round, feels good. The invoke does just terrible damage. Awful. It could at least be 2d4. But it's not, so it's awful. However, it creates difficult terrain for a round, and that can really mess with things because it's not, the area is not enormous. But keep in mind, it depends on the creature you're doing. If you've got a large or a huge creature, the patch it's going to leave behind is very large. So yeah, is this nuts? Is it the craziest, strongest thing? No, but it's good and it's reliable, I think, in my mind, to where the debuff on the passive is good enough and the disruption is good enough on the invoke that I'm going to give it an A. And I just wish it did more damage. I still think it deserves an A though, because it's strong enough with everything other than the damage that the damage doesn't need to carry it in any way. That brings us to Marssyl, Rune of Impact. This is drawn on a bludgeoning weapon or unarmed strike, and this can still be ranged, mind you, because there are ranged weapons that do bludgeoning damage. The passive, strikes deal 1 bludgeoning splash damage per weapon damage die. If the weapon is a melee weapon, then that splash damage doesn't hurt the rune bearer or you, the runesmith, if it's not on your weapon. The invoke, on the next successful strike with the weapon before the end of the wielder's next turn, deal 1 additional damage die with that strike. The creature struck makes a fortitude save, getting pushed back 10 feet on a fail or 20 feet on a crit fail. This is the other side of the coin for bludgeoning here versus what we saw earlier with slashing and piercing. Here we have a passive that I don't love. The damage added is very small. It encourages being surrounded by multiple creatures but not flanked, which doesn't come up that often. It obviously can. It it can hurt allies, but not all allies, right? If you're an ally here, it won't hurt you, but still, it generally hurts allies. I just don't love splash damage that much. It's okay, but it's not persistent bleed damage. Like, I think that's much better. The Invoke, though, I do like a lot more. Adding an extra die can be really meaningful. Obviously, if you're using it with like a D4, D6 weapon, yeah, no, you're not excited. But on a D8, D10, D12, yeah, that's going to feel like it was worth it, right? You throw it on the Barbarians, you know, two-handed mallet or whatever, and yeah, I feel pretty good about that. There is always a chance that your ally or yourself, whoever's got it triggered, doesn't manage to land a strike before it gives up. Sure, but I think most of the time, you'll get value out of this. I don't think it's the end of the world, but I think you can rely on it a decent amount of the time. And then there's the ranged side of it, because we have some strong ranged weapons out there, especially guns that can do bludgeoning damage. This can easily go on those, and it will feel good on those too, getting an extra die of damage, especially on ones that have the fatal trait, right? Fatal D10, fatal D12. You're just adding a dice that becomes a D10, D12, whatever. Yeah, that's going to feel really good. And the push is particularly meaningful in that range case where they don't want anybody coming near them. So pushing a creature back 10 feet is already a lot. 20 feet's nuts. So I think that's pretty solid. The Invoke here is really good in my book, but the passive just doesn't do it. So this landed a B. If the passive was as good as we saw with the bleed damage, this would be an A. Next up is Oljinex, Rune of Coward's Bane. This is cast on a shield. The passive. This gives a +2 status bonus to the hardness of the shield, but only against physical ranged attacks. Of course, when it's raised. Yeah, you're shield blocking with it. Level +4, you add one more hardness. It takes a lot more to add to that hardness. The invocation. This creates an illusion that, like, it's illusory walls, basically, that force enemies adjacent to the rune bearer to not be able to move away from the bearer for one round unless they disbelieve the illusion, which generally takes seeking. And this is against the Runesmith's class DC, which, as we've seen, follows spellcaster progression, which is really good. So, okay, we've got a status bonus to hardness, but only against physical ranged attacks. That is like 95% of ranged attacks, so I'm not overly concerned that it's only physical ranged attacks. That's the majority of them. But only against ranged attacks is kind of sad. Eh, you could easily go multiple encounters without that happening. You probably won't. I think a lot of DMs put a mix of ranged and melee characters, but so I think it'll happen often enough, but it's not crazy often. But it is impactful, right? You are saving yourself a good amount of hit points by having this extra hardness, especially level 1. I wish it scaled better. It should be 1 every 2 levels, but that would also be a lot, I guess. Anyway, I think it's good. I still think the passive is solid, and I'm happy to have it there as somebody with a shield or with an ally with that shield. But the passive is not nearly as strong as the invoke. This is a fantastic invoke. This is control. Sure, maybe there's only one creature up by your shield wielding ally. Maybe there's two. That would be ideal in my mind, but let's say there's even just one. That creature can't leave, right? I mean, they can, but they have to disbelieve it. If they're going to spend an action to make it just so they can move away, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. That feels like it's a good situation, and that's going to be a bad situation for that enemy, right? Otherwise, they're stuck in combat with somebody they probably don't want to be there with. I mean, you throw this on a spellcaster, they have to disbelieve and then move away. They don't have any space to cast anymore. This becomes a really significantly powerful control tool that should not be underestimated because, again, there's no save immediately, right? They have to choose to take an action. They're just held up by this. And it's against what is a strong DC because yours, again, is spellcaster levels. This is an A for me because the invoke to me here is just so good for control. The passive is still good. I'm not upset about the passive. It's not the best one we've had, but I'm not upset about it. But yeah, the invoke is great. All right, that brings us to Pluuna, Rune of Illumination. Drawn on a creature or armor, the passive is it creates bright light in a 20-foot emanation and dim light out to 40 feet. Creatures in the emanation take a -1 item penalty. I think I said status in the original video. Maybe I said, I don't know what I said. Anyway, -1 item penalty to stealth checks. And then on invoke, creatures in the light must succeed at a fortitude save against your, meaning the runesmith's, DC or be dazzled for 1 round. Then the light goes to just dim light in a 20-foot emanation for 1 round. And then it'll go away. So this is definitely different from what we've seen before. There are some positives here for sure. Right? Keep in mind that an emanation can include the creature or not. Up to the creature, usually. I guess it'd be up to you as the creator of light. I'm not really sure. This could allow an ally to kind of walk in front and make it harder for enemies to stay stealth. Maybe that's not amazing. Maybe it's okay. That's probably not the biggest part of this. Now, it does make it harder for your own allies to stealth. And I don't love that part of it. So but then again, if you've got somebody lit up, your party's probably not stealthing next to them anyway. So maybe not a big deal. It will help decrease ambushes a little bit. The stealth thing I'm give and take on, but because there's plus and minuses, it makes it not the best. However, if nobody's trying to stealth on your party and they just need light because you've got a couple team members who don't have dark vision, yeah, you just have a massive light potentially all day. You could just etch it on and leave it there, right? Even if you do use it and invoke in the middle of combat, you can always just etch it back on. So you basically have permanent light because of this, which is cool. And I like that. And you can always invoke it to get rid of some light. So if you don't want the light there anymore, you can get rid of it. All that's okay. It's not mind blowing, but it's okay. Then we have the invoke, and well, dazzled is a decent condition, right? It's by no means blind, but it's good. Everybody being concealed is good, so it's not mind blowing, but I like it. But it's everybody who's in the light, including your allies, and that's a pretty big emanation. And considering the distance you have to be as the rune bearer, if you aren't the one with it on you, but it's on an ally, you want to invoke it, you're going to be close enough that you'll be in that light. You're potentially doing this to yourself. I just, yeah, I think if it was enemies only, this would be an A. The invoke still has value. I still think it's useful. And keep in mind, if it's an ally or yourself, they don't have to be in the emanation, so they shouldn't have to make the save, the bearer themselves. But it's not strong enough at any point to give it an A, but it's not C territory. I still think it's worth contention, so I think it's a B, but it's not one of my stronger Bs. Next up, we have Ranshu, Rune of Thunder. This is drawn on a creature or object again. If a creature doesn't take any action with the move trait, by the end of its turn, it's going to take 3 electricity damage. And this goes up by 1 every 2 levels. So that's your passive. Then in the invoke, this deals 1d8 electricity damage with a basic fortitude save. Goes up by a d8 every 2 levels. Again, cast on an enemy. This is another one. This is very similar to the fire rune. The passive here, again, I really don't love. It's better than the fire rune, but I don't think it's amazing. It does incentivize that creatures be forced to move, which can be beneficial, right? If you've got an enemy that's up next to one of your allies that has reactive strike and you throw it on them, they're going to want to move away. They're going to, almost certainly trigger this damage. That's something, and then you can invoke later. Okay. And 3 damage at level 1 is significant. It goes up very slowly. Eventually, by level 5, dealing 5 damage, yeah, they're not going to care anymore about that. And yeah, so they can just stand in place and take a little bit of damage and they probably won't worry about it. So you might think, oh, I can throw this on a spellcaster and they'll have to move around more. And no, they really won't. They can just tank a few damage by the time you're a few levels up. So I just it honestly, this could have been another 2 or 3 damage every 2 levels, and it probably would have been okay. Anyway, that's not great. And then we know my thoughts on the invoke. It's just not a lot of damage. There's no riders. It's just not a lot of damage. The passive here is still better than fire. But you know what? I'm still just going to give this a C. Other people might like the passive more than I do. If it scaled better, I'd give this a B, but it's a C for me. That brings us to Rehgog, Rune of Bestial Might. This is cast on a willing creature. The creature gains an imprecise scent sense out to 30 feet. And the invocation, the creature can step as a free action, and the next unarmed strike it makes before the start of its next turn deals an extra die of damage. Getting imprecise scent sense is actually not that well. You can get other imprecise senses too, but it's not crazy. If you really want one, there are ancestors and stuff that can give that to you. I'm not that impressed by it. I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt to have one, but imprecise senses really aren't amazing. They're okay. Is this a good enough passive that you want it etched at all times? I don't think so. Unless you want to prep for the invocation, but just for the passive, no. The invocation can be decent on the right character, but keep in mind the difference between this and what we had with our bludgeoning rune. That one said the next strike that hits before the end of the creature's next turn deals an extra die of damage. This is the next unarmed strike it attempts, the next one it makes. So if it misses that one and hits the one after that, no extra die of damage. It has to hit the next one. And that's terrible. Why do that when you've already done it the right way before? This just seems worse for no reason. It is still an extra die of damage, but you have to make sure you have a solid unarmed strike to add this onto. Obviously, you're only doing this if that's the case, right? Throw it on to a monk, like a Dragon Stance monk, is going to feel really good, right? That D10 is going to hit hard. But there's plenty of ancestries that can get access to D8s for an unarmed strike. Cool. Give it to them, right? It has some value there. But I don't think it's the invoke is weaker because of the way it's written. The passive is bad. All that put together, this is another C, where we're hitting some C's, unfortunately. That brings us to Sertum, Rune of Preparedness. This is put on a creature. Passive here is the creature has a +1 to survival checks. I think it's a status bonus. I didn't write it down. That's weird. Anyway, to survival checks and any area specific lore checks for the area you've chosen when putting this on. The rune bearer can use survival for initiative, and the bonus counts. And the bonus goes up to +2 at ninth and +3 at 17th level. The invocation is that the rune bearer can step up to 3 times as a free action. Oh, yeah, this is fantastic if you've got anybody who's got survival skill at an even decent place. Adding a +1 is already cool. Like, that's helpful. There are some good skill actions with survival. Not amazing stuff, but good stuff. But of course, what you're really here for is the fact that you now use it for your initiative. And if you've buffed it up and you keep it at the highest ranks you can, and you've got wisdom pumping in there, this is going to be really great initiative rolls. Getting that +2 and +3 later on only makes it feel better. And then we have the invocation. When we talked about the other one, we got to step, you got to step, but all creatures got to step, right? Or in the last one where you can step for free as well, which I like the step on the last one, but the rest of it was terrible. And it was, again, one step is good, but it's not crazy. And that assumed a melee with the last one. Well, you could have had unarmed ranged attacks, but that's very uncommon. Anyway, here you're just saying this is somebody who uses survival, could be anybody, including like a druid or something, which I feel like this fits really well on. And now they get to step 3 times as a free action. That's huge. Keep in mind there are some ways to get your step to be more than 5 feet. You could probably cover some good distance with 3 free steps, but even in the base case of 5 feet, 3 free steps is a massive change in your position. That is no joke. As an invoke, that's going to feel really good. Add it to what I think is a good, strong passive, and maybe I'm overstating it, but I'm going to give this one an A as long as anybody in the party is good at survival. All right, we're getting closer to the end here. We're at Thullax, Rune of Corrosion, on a creature or an object, and this one's interesting on an object. The passive here is the creature object has resistance to each physical type reduced by 1. So bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing all reduced by 1. Immunities are not affected, and the reduction goes up by 1 every 2 levels. So you're going to be dropping down those physical resistances quite a bit over time, but it doesn't start high, unfortunately. The invocation is the bearer takes 1d6 acid damage with a basic fortitude save. When on a crit fail, it's a 1d6 persistent acid damage on top of that. Level plus 2, the damage increases by a d6 and the persistent by 1. Physical resistance is pretty common, so I like reducing it. Sadly, the amount here is just awful. It should have started at 3, at least. Starting at 1 is just so bad. When we have low level creatures, levels 1, 2, 3, they usually have like 3 resistance. By the time they get to level 3, they probably have 5 resistance. By the time they get to 7 or 8, they probably are closer to like 10 resistance. And by the time you're level 6, or we'll just say level 8, you're at 4 reduction. It's okay, but it's not mind blowing. It's not, I don't know. I don't know if that's good enough. If you've got nothing but physical damaging allies and you're going against a lot of physical resisted creatures, sure, I could see throwing the passive on there and letting your team do a little more damage that round, but they should probably take a different approach or leave it to somebody who's not doing physical damage. That is what it is. Then we have the invocation. A d6 is at least better than a d4. Acid damage isn't often resisted, but it's still terrible damage. It's still just a d6 of damage going up by a d6 of damage. On a crit fail, it's nice to have persistent damage, but it's not enough to make up for what is honestly lackluster. Again, in the invocation. There's nothing else here but damage, and the damage is bad. And the resistance reduction is just not enough at a base level. And, it builds slowly, which I could give on physical resistance, but it just starts too low. So, all in all, I'm going to give out another C here. I'm sure there's other people who feel like this would be stronger than I think it is, but I just don't love this again. And we have Tilus, Rune of Vocabulary. This goes on to a creature. The passive is the creature gains knowledge of a language you know, and the creature gets +1 status bonus to society checks and lore checks related to writing, library lore, scribing lore, things like that. This goes up to +2 at level 9 and +3 at level 17. The invocation. The rune bearer auto succeeds at flat checks made due to auditory disruption, like a deafened condition or things like that, for 1 round. They can speak their true mind even if confused, controlled, or unable to speak. Gaining a language is nothing. That is a joke of a writer in my book. That's just silly because it's one that the party already knows. I don't know. The bonus to society checks is good. I like that, but the lores here are way too specific to almost ever come up or matter. This just isn't a good passive. It should affect more than just society checks for recall knowledge. And I love recall knowledge. If it was all recall knowledge, yeah, I'd be very excited. This is what, maybe 20% of recall knowledge checks or less? I, I don't know. I just anyway, so I think the passive is pretty much a wash. Then we have the very circumstantial invocation. There are so few effects that cause a situation like this early on where you have to make flat checks to be able to make sound. So infrequent. And then you've got those effects that control you or confuse you. They're not going to come at early levels at all, but they will come up more later, right? So you think, okay, at higher levels, this will be more useful. Why? So you can still speak your mind? You can't control yourself. You're just able to speak your mind. Whoop-de-doo. I I hate this. I think this is terrible. This is a D. This just feels like such a waste. And it's so easy to have made this good enough, and they just didn't. So yeah, I'm sure there's people who would love this, but I just think it's awful. And finally, we have Zhok, Rune of Homecoming. This is drawn on a creature. The creature, as a passive, has a plus 15-foot status bonus to their speeds, but only when movement would end closer to the Runesmith than when they started. So you're not casting it on yourself. You can never end up closer to yourself than you already started. Well, at least not for the passive. Then the invoke. You teleport the creature to a square adjacent to you. So yeah, really not casting this on yourself. If it's an unwilling creature, that creature gets a will save to try to negate it. This can go either way, on an ally or an enemy. I think the common use will definitely be to etch it on an ally, and I think that's the stronger use. I like that it encourages tactical decision making on the battlefield. The passive is actually really good. It just says you have to end closer to the Runesmith than when you started. When you're crossing across a battlefield, that's not hard to do. You can even do stuff to escape enemies as long as you end up even 5 feet closer. If you're 25 feet turned into 40 feet and you have to do an obscure route to make sure you end up 5 feet closer, but you can get so far that that's hard for them to keep up, that was worth it. But yeah, crossing the entire battlefield to get from one side to the other, but staying just 5 feet closer to the runesmith as you do it, I just think there's a ton of value in that. 15 feet is a lot, even with the rider that you have to end up closer than you started. I still think used right, that is very, very easy to gain value from. And then the invoke is just good. This is a get my ally to safety movement, right? It's not going to trigger anything. They didn't use anything. It just teleported them. You just got them out of harm's way. And I love that. I love that you can just save an ally on the spot. And that's just strong. Teleportation's just good. Then we've got the other side of it. You've got the unwilling side. You are a melee runesmith. You've got an ally near you. You're like, I just want to pull this enemy right here so I can flank with the barbarian who's going to tear them to pieces. I throw it on them. All three actions. That's fine. I throw it on you. You're 30 feet away. I port you over here. As long as you don't save, boom, barbarian's going to just destroy you. I think there's great reasons to move enemies around. There's great reasons to move allies around. The invoke is really strong. I think the passive is good. So I'm going to give this an A. I like this a lot. This is one of those tactical pieces of support and control that just feels like it's useful to have with you. And that's it for this video. I honestly believe there are quite a few that could be buffed. Most of the damage ones, all of them, should probably just be put back to their playtest, and the others that weren't in the playtest should be buffed to match the playtest. As it stands, I think we have some really solid choices, though. And yeah, you'll feel the impact of the right ones every session. What do you think? Am I crazy for giving out a D to Tilus? Did I overrate Holtrik? Can you remember what those names were tied to? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, adventure on.